Senator Averil.
I welcome the opportunity on this important legislation. As an adopted person, I've always been deeply conflicted on the issue of abortion. For when people speak about unwanted pregnancies, I can't but reflect on the fact that I was one. I was the unplanned daughter of a single woman for whom keeping me was never a real option in the Ireland of 1978. I'm grateful for the fact that adoption gave me a chance both to be part of another family and to get to know my birth mother and half-siblings later in life. So when some, on the pro-choice side, speak of abortion as a simple women's rights issue, without a thought for the life of the unborn child, it upsets me greatly. But so too does the utter lack of compassion that extreme pro-life groups show towards women in distress, particularly when that lack of compassion encompasses women whose own lives are at risk, victims of rape or incest, or those whose babies cannot survive outside the womb. Abortion is never desirable, but sometimes the consequences of it not being available are worse. Despite huge advances in medical science and the excellent care provided by our hospitals, situations can and do arise in which continuing with a pregnancy may cost the mother her own life. Thankfully, such cases are rare, but they are very real. And there is no doubt in my mind that in such circumstances, everything possible must be done to save the mother's life, including termination of her pregnancy where this is necessary. As things stand, an Irish woman has a constitutional right to an abortion where continuing with her pregnancy represents a real and substantial risk to her life. This was clearly established 21 years ago in the X case. However, the failure of successive governments to legislate for X has meant that there is still no proper framework in place through which requests for such terminations can be decided upon. We know that abortions have been carried out in Irish hospitals since the X case. What we don't know is how many have taken place and in what circumstances, or if in the absence of regulation and reporting, some hospitals are carrying out more than they should be. Equally, we have no idea if others are being overly restrictive and putting women's lives at risk by denying them life-saving treatment. This bill is designed to rectify that problem. It will ensure that regardless of what hospital a woman is in, the same procedure will apply. The same clear criteria will have to be followed, and the same safeguards will be in place to protect both the mother and her unborn child. The bill provides that every effort must be made to save both lives where this is possible, and abortion won't be sanctioned unless it is absolutely necessary to avert the risk to the mother's life. It has been claimed by some groups that this bill provides for late abortions right up to birth. That is simply not true. The legislation very clearly states that once a fetus has reached the point where it could survive outside the womb, early delivery will be used instead of termination. Every effort will be made to ensure that the baby survives, as would be the case with any other premature baby. The protections that the bill provides for the unborn child are absolutely vital in my view. The baby has a right to life too, and every step should be taken to bring it safely into the world. But in the event of conflict, where the mother's life is at risk, priority must be given to saving her life. Several members have expressed concerns about Head 9 and its provision for termination of pregnancy where the risk to the mother's life comes from suicide. I expect an amendment to be tabled at committee stage to delete this provision, as they were in the Dáil. I will not be supporting those amendments for a number of reasons. First, it is simply not possible to legislate for the X case without including a provision for suicide. As members are aware, the X case was a suicide case. X was a 14-year-old child who had become pregnant as a result of a brutal rape and was determined to kill herself rather than give birth to her attacker's baby. To exclude suicide from the bill would be to completely ignore the substance of the X case and refuse to do our constitutional duty as legislators. It would also amount to a deliberate and anti-democratic denial of the will of the people as expressed in successive referenda where they have rejected attempts to roll back on the X case. Second, I think it would be utterly hypocritical of me to support the deletion of Head 9 from the bill when I cannot honestly say that I wouldn't support somebody in X's circumstances choosing to terminate her pregnancy. For I know in my heart that if a 14-year-old girl that I knew was raped and I was convinced that she would end her own life if forced to go through with the pregnancy, I would do everything I could to support her. I'd talk it through with her, and I'd try to convince her to go for counselling before making any decision. I'd hope that she could find a way to continue with the pregnancy and either keep the baby or put it up for adoption. But ultimately, I'd understand if she couldn't. And I believe that most Irish people would too. For the reasons I have outlined at the start, I believe that abortion is always a tragedy. However, losing the lives of both mother and baby is far worse. Over the course of this debate, several members have referred to suicidal ideation in distrustful and cynical tones. The implication, whether you intend it or not, is that mental health problems are not as serious as physical ones. I find this deeply worrying. For too long, people with mental health problems have been stigmatised in this country. As a result, many suffer in silence instead of seeking help. Tragically, increasing numbers of men and women are taking their own lives. In fact, suicide now claims more lives than road accidents. There is no doubt that the stigma and shame associated with mental health difficulties have been huge contributory factors to this needless loss of life. For this reason, I think it is insensitive and downright dangerous to dismiss the issue of suicide in the way that some people have in debating this legislation. I accept that mental health problems are more difficult to diagnose than physical ones. And that is why I believe it's appropriate that the bill provides for a much more restrictive procedure where termination of pregnancy is being sought on grounds of suicide. In such cases, 3 medics will have to unanimously agree that granting a termination is the only way to save a woman's life. It should be remembered, whether this bill passes or not, that abortion is already legal in this country on grounds of suicidal ideation. Nothing in this bill changes that fact. The only difference is that, as things stand, an assessment by a single psychiatrist could facilitate an abortion taking place. Some commentators have claimed that women would feign suicidal thoughts in order to access abortion. Not only is this deeply offensive, it is also utterly unrealistic. Let's not forget, as has been pointed out earlier, that abortion is freely available in the UK. Faced with the choice of being interrogated by 3 doctors in Irish public hospital and having a suicide diagnosis on their medical records for life, I believe that most Irish women will continue to travel to the UK even after this legislation is passed. Personally, I cannot see the provisions in Head 9 being used, except in extreme circumstances, such as where a woman is restricted from travelling because she's a minor in the care of the state. It has also been claimed that the provisions of the bill are opening the door to abortion on demand. In support of this claim, members have referred to the fact that when legislation was introduced in Britain in the 1960s, the outcome was ultimately more liberal than envisaged. That may indeed be true, but the UK is totally different to Ireland in that it doesn't have a written constitution. It is precisely because our constitution contains explicit protection for the right to life of the unborn that more liberal abortion legislation can never be introduced in this country unless the people vote for it in a referendum. Cathaoirleach, my party has decided to allow a free vote on this bill. I initially argued that we should do so last November because I believe that no member on either side of the debate should be forced to vote against their conscience on an issue like this. I think it is a dreadful shame that the government parties have not taken the same approach. I don't agree with Deputy Lucinda Creighton on this issue. In fact, myself and Lucinda haven't agreed on most issues since our days together in Trinity College as students. But I think that she did an excellent job as Minister for European Affairs. And I think it's ridiculous that she was forced to resign that post for taking a stand on an issue that would simply not be subject to the whip in any other democracy. For my own part, my conscience tells me that I must vote in favour of this legislation for all the reasons that I have outlined. It's not a decision that I have arrived at lightly. I've listened to informed debate on this issue for many years. I've met with different interest groups on both sides of the debate. I've read all of the letters and emails that have been sent to me, and I appreciate the fact that so many people over the last few months have taken the time to do so and to share their personal stories with me and their views on such a sensitive topic. The circumstances of my own birth mean that this is a particularly emotive issue for me. I will never support abortion on demand, but, as I said at the outset, I recognise that a termination of pregnancy is sometimes necessary to save a woman's life, and I believe that a proper and consistent framework must be put in place to deal with such situations. This bill does exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less. and that is why I'll be supporting it.
Well, Margaret,